Welcome to the I-29 Moo Dairy podcast. I-29 Moo University is a consortium of land-grant universities in Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska. This podcast covers timely news, information, and research for today's dairy industry.
Good afternoon and welcome to the I-29 Moo University Dairy Podcast. My name is Fred Hall and I'm the dairy specialist for ISU Extension. Today we'll talk about silage safety during harvest and around the silage pile. My co-host is Heidi Carroll, Extension Livestock Stewardship Field Specialist and Beef Quality Assurance Coordinator. Welcome back to the podcast, Heidi.
Thanks for having me, Fred.
Heidi, can you introduce our guests?
On today's podcast, we have Alexis Stinton, an agriculture instructor at Lake Area Technical College in Watertown, South Dakota. Alexis, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with Modak Dairy?
Sure thing. So I'm a graduate of Lake Area Tech, and through the program here, we have internships that we need to complete. And so I started working for Modak as an intern, and I liked it so much that I stuck around and continued to work with them for several months after that until I got a position here at the school. But even after leaving, I would still go back and help them out, do pregnancy checks and things like that. So I've been working with them periodically off and on for a very long time, 10 years or so, maybe even longer. So we've got a great relationship, the school and Modak. They allow us to go out and utilize their herd for doing treatments or learning techniques like jugular venipuncture or tail sticks or things like that, which is amazing. And so what we do is help them out during the silage season by taking our students and we go out and we teach silage pile safety while they're covering the pile. So we give back to them when we can by letting the students cover the pile.
So Alexis, as you're teaching this, do you also teach their employees?
Sometimes I can redirect the employees when I need to, but for me, there's a bit of a language barrier. So sometimes I'll make adjustments to somebody that's, standing in one of the lines and, or I can tell somebody who speaks English, hey, you want to tell that guy you might need to stand a little closer, or a little further away, or, watch out, there's a tractor coming, but I do what I can. But most of the time, the guys are there to teach each other from Modak because they speak the same language where I have that language barrier.
So I'm assuming harvest at Modak is pretty much done. Now the pile is complete, or are we still in the process of it?
I think we're still in the process. There's been a bit of a late rain delay. We just got 2 plus inches here yesterday. So I think that if they weren't done chopping, they're going to be held up for quite a bit until they can actually get back into the field and chop.
Rain delays always bring a new set of risk and dangers. Let's tell the listeners a little bit about what you do after a rain delay.
Yeah, anytime you've got rain, the mud comes in, and so it becomes slicker to deal with as far as just walking across the concrete to get to the pile. But then when you have to climb the pile, if there's rain that's been settling in some of those spots on the top of the existing pile, that becomes problematic. So we always tell people, make sure you wear the right kinds of shoes. Shoes that aren't going to puncture through the existing tarp, because that in itself causes a lot of problems. And also make sure that you wear shoes that are pretty sticky. I'm going to say sticky shoes. That way you're not slipping around on the silage type tarps.
Let's kind of identify the top 3 things before you get to the pile that you talk about to the students.
Yeah, that's a kind of a good one. So my 3 main focuses are silage face safety, because there's always going to be an open face. So I talk about the safety of the face, either standing underneath it, standing above it. Sometimes there can be like a little bit of an overhang, so standing too close to the edge could be problematic. Fortunately for us, we don't ever have to go to the face because that side of the pile is still covered from last year's silage and the tarp is still there. So we don't need to cover that. They leave that But when we walk in front of the face, if we need to, I want to make sure that the students know not to get underneath in case there's an avalanche, because silage is heavy. So we talk about the face safety. We talk about safety on top of the pile. So as far as slipping, because we start usually pretty early in the morning, 6:30, 6:45, somewhere in there. And depending on the time of year, well, I should rephrase that. Depending on the type of weather we've been having, it can be pretty slick up there. So I've covered the pile when it was a great, amazing day of, 80 degrees. And I've also covered the pile when it was frosty on the top. So let me tell you, covering a pile that's already kind of slick, has a lot of dew and condensation, that's scary. I also talk about safety with the equipment. So, and watching your fellow neighbors, how do you throw the tires? Of course, we use tire walls, so it's a little bit lighter, but they do get heavy at the end of the day, and we get sloppy when we get tired. So I always want to make sure that we have, safety as far as the equipment going back and forth to the people. Watch out for the tractors that are bringing tires up to the top of the pile. Watch out for your fellow coworkers too. So if they slip or fall or go down, make sure that they're okay and you can get them up. So the third big thing that I talk about is actually pulling that tarp from the top of the pile down the side. So the biggest thing with that is keeping the tarp low because we don't want people to fly away. I'm also make sure that they know to keep an eye out for their neighbors, because when that tarp starts to come down, sometimes it can go quick. So we want to make sure that they don't get tripped up or lose their footing and then get buried underneath that tarp. That's extremely dangerous. So I always say, have your buddies on either side of you, know who you're looking out for. So in case something does happen, we're not trying to find you underneath X number of feet of tarp. So the other thing that goes along with that, they all joke and say, oh, well, maybe it's just a big blanket. I'm like, well, that could be. However, it doesn't take long for those gases to start to form. So gases is the other thing that I'm really concerned about. And a lot of times when we get down to the bottom of the pile and we're waiting for some dirt to come and, shore up the bottom of the edge there, students, mess around, and I say, hey, don't do that. And every once in a while you get someone who does it anyway, and they lift the tarp up a little bit and they realize, oh my gosh, yeah, that stuff is pretty potent, those gases. So they learn the hard way that gases are scary. So the biggest three things I think that I talk about is the face safety equipment, while you're on the top of the pile, and how do you handle the tarp?
Some of our listeners are from areas in the upper Midwest where they have upright silos. And, I grew up with upright silos, so gas was always on the top of our minds because, if it takes 2 days to fill that silo, you had to blow it to get gas out so you could be around there. But we tend to forget that that pile is creating gas. And that was brought to me a couple of years ago. I walked out just at daylight. We were getting things cranked up, and you can see that orange or yellow gas floating around, the edge of the pile. And wow, if it had been daylight, I probably would have walked right through there and not even realized it was there. But it's dangerous no matter what kind of storage we have. So Heidi, what do you have on your mind?
I think you both have alluded to what we consider those 7 major hazards around bunker piles of silage. And those 7 major hazards are what you alluded to is the fatigue or complacency, exposure to silage gases, tractor truck rollovers, or rollover by other equipments, entanglement in equipment and machinery, the falling from the heights that you really stressed there, Alexis, and being crushed by an avalanche or collapsing pile. When you emphasize these things to students, what are some of their concerns or some of the questions that they come to you with?
It's kind of a tough question. Most of the students have been doing this a long time. A lot of them come to me that, they hate covering piles. They don't want to because they do it at home, or they end up going home shortly after we do it here and they cover their piles. So a lot of kids know what some of the safety concerns are, and they've been brought up the right way to know that these are hazards. And the students that have never done this before, like they've come from town and they just want to go help their grandfather on the farm, honestly, handling tire walls is their biggest question. How do I do this so I don't get tired? And so MODAC has a unique system. For most of us, covering a tire or covering a silage pile with tires is you grab tires, you walk up to the top of the hill and you put it down, and you go back and you grab two more, you walk up, and that's how you do it, right? So MODAC has discovered a way to do this effectively, and you don't get so tired. So their methodology is to only cover half the pile to start with. And so then you can still drive up to the top of the pile with a bunch of tires. And so they'll drop off those tires or tire walls at the top, and you'll have a mountain of tires. And so what we do then is line up in the chain and do a bucket brigade, I'm going to call it. So one person is going to pass a tire down to the next person, and you keep passing them down to the bottom so that no one has to walk back up with the tires. You're passing them down, letting gravity help you out. So it helps with the fatigue, but you still get tired. So I think, handling the tires to begin with is one of those questions that the students are all like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of tires. I'm really overwhelmed. How does this work? What do I do? We show them. It's like, okay, watch for a minute, jump in the line. And so they see what's going on and they jump in, and then it gains confidence, which is really neat to see. A kid who's never been on a silage pile, doesn't know anything about it, never handled a tire before. Oh, I should also stress that one of those things about handling tire walls is the wires. So I always bring extra gloves because I always get kids to forget gloves. That's the other thing is I forgot gloves. Do you have any? I guess that would be the biggest question that I get.
Heidi, have you got information that will combine with the podcast about silage safety?
The checklists that are available as far as resources are part of the UMass Center out of Minnesota. And so those resources are easily available for producers. You can find those at uwash.umn.edu. And a lot of those are quick and simple. They allude to scheduling team meetings to talk about risks. It alludes to just having the equipment ready to go and different things to make sure that you are being proactive in training programs with all types of help, whether it's full-time help or whether it's part-time help, kind of similar to Alexis, the students coming out and just being that extra crew and hands on deck to make the process go smooth and safe.
Alexis, you shared a lot of really good information with us during the podcast. Any closing comments that you want to make sure folks remember after the podcast?
I guess the biggest thing is a lot of times there's a lot of common sense that goes along with, working around the big machinery and around piles. If you're on the top of a silage pile and you slip once, so just be careful, you're probably going to slip again. And yeah, it's a lot of common sense. And I found that when I talk too much in the classroom about silage safety, the students have a tendency to tune out. So the fact that I can take them out to a silage pile and actually show them, okay, this is the real deal, that we are doing this for real. This isn't a joke. It cements better what it is that I'm trying to get the point across, that safety is essential. Because I've seen some accidents happen, and there was one time I had a student that actually did go down when we were bringing that tarp down, and he was really lucky because he had friends on either side of him that grabbed him arm in arm, and they just lifted him up and dragged him down the rest of the way just to keep him from being buried. So I've seen some things happen. So I can relate that information to the students, and then when they actually get up there, they're like, yeah, this is harder than I thought it was, so I think a lot of hands-on.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to share that information with us. We would remind folks that this is the I-29 MooU Dairy Podcast, and we thank you and thank our listeners and look forward to visiting with them at the next podcast. I-29 MooU is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to extension.iastate.edu /diversity/ext.